I just want to say to today's speaker, you got off on a light week. Normally, the announcements and the sergeants go on and on and on. So let's get on to the program, as they say. Today's speaker is Guy Tower with an economic outlook. He's a regional economist and an employment economist with the Oregon Employment Department covering the Rogue Valley and the South Coast. He's worked for the agency since 1999 and was originally hired as the workforce analyst for Douglas County. In 2001, Guy received a promotion to the regional economist position within the Workforce and Economic Research Division and covers Jackson, Josephine, Coos, and Curry counties. A native Oregonian, Guy holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in economics and a minor in business administration from Southern Oregon University. Guy concentrates on labor force, economic, and demographic data. Research subjects Guy has published recently include the region's housing and construction industry trends, South Coast post-secondary education outcome data, as well as articles covering Oregon's business employment dynamics and formation trends. A midlife career changer, he also spent nearly 2 decades in the restaurant industry before going to work for the state of Oregon. Rotarians and guests, Guy Tower.
Good afternoon. Great to be here. I didn't chase everyone away knowing that you were going to be listening to a talk on economics today, so that's great news. You're better than most. Let's see. I'm going to kind of wander around a little bit so I can actually see what I'm talking about here because I don't have any notes or a handout or anything or a laptop in front of me. So yeah, I worked for the Oregon Employment Department. I've been around here for 25 years. I graduated from Medford Senior High School. Go Tornadoes. So pretty much a local product. Today, we're just going to focus on employment trends in the Rogue Valley, a little bit on Oregon, where we're at coming out of the pandemic recession a few years ago, what jobs have come back. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about federal government employment, kind of how that relates to the Rogue Valley and trends there, what we've seen, because that's been in the news a lot lately. And also going to focus a little bit on construction trends, housing, where we see that going a little bit. And also the Office of Economic Analysis just put out their recent quarterly forecast. I've got a couple of slides from them. So borrowed a little bit from here and there, but hopefully just take about 20 minutes. And looks like we're pretty early on the agenda. So I'll have time for questions at the end if you have anything else you want to talk about. But the first slide is just if you are asked to participate in any surveys. I know the Oregon Employment Department sends out a vacancy survey. The Census Bureau is always creating new things to ask people about. The American Community Survey, it's about a 1 in 8 household survey to get a lot of detailed information about local economies and people. And as well as the Census Bureau also recently produced a new survey called the Business Trend and Outlook Survey. And that's statewide data. I don't have any of that information here today, but it is interesting to look and see what business perceptions are in terms of hiring needs, where they see the economy going in 6 months or so, what industries are facing the most headwinds and things like that. So that's a lot of data that's available also from the census, but I don't have time to cover all that today. But if you are in a survey, please respond because it makes our data better. So this is just a chart. First chart here is the economic output for our economy. One of the most frequently cited statistics you might hear on the news is the GDP or gross domestic product. How fast is the economy growing? And we have that data locally at the metropolitan statistical area level. And this is the data here. The green bars are for Josephine County and the red bars are for Jackson County. You can really see that in terms of actual numbers, our economy is just about doubled here in 20 years, 6.6 billion to 10.3 billion. And that's in inflation adjusted dollars. So not just the change in the value of the dollar driving that number up. That's the real output of how our economy has grown. And our economy has actually grown about the same pace as Oregon over the past 20 years in terms of the percentage growth changes. Both economies have grown about the similar pace. We kind of kept up with Oregon in Southern Oregon here as well. This is an interesting chart. The Census Bureau puts together about 15 of their most recent economic indicators to create this index of economic activity. And you can see the gray, let's see if I can get this to work here. Spot like this. It's not gonna. I'll go back. But you can see the grayed out bars here. Those are areas where we were in recession. So the first gray bar was the Great Recession of 2008, 2009 in there. And then the most skinny green gray bars are from the pandemic recession about 5 years. And you can see that in that first grayed out recession area, the indicators were still flashing around zero, a little bit positive, a little bit negative. So it's not a perfect leading index in terms of, yes, when we see this number go down, we're definitely in a recession. It takes a little while. Whereas the pandemic recession, it just hit overnight. So all of those indicators just kind of fell in unison there in about early 2020. But you can see most recently, since 2020, we had a bit of a bounce back coming out of that recession. And since that time, things have just been generally pretty steady. We're not seeing a big trail off in terms of all of these economic indicators compiled into an index. You know, the ones that make the headlines every day, you know, Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index, lowest in 4 years. But just because people feel bad, it doesn't mean they always stop spending. Sometimes people spend when they feel bad. So really look at the numbers in terms of what's actually happening in terms of retail sales and things like that. Certainly, there's a lot of angst regarding changes at the federal level. But so far, the data has been holding up pretty solid, although things have been slightly weaker the last 6 months. In terms of our unemployment rates in the Rogue Valley, we're still at very historically low levels of unemployment. That data up there is for December. That was 4.7%. And we don't have a comparable number for January. And we won't have comparable numbers in terms of the seasonally adjusted numbers for the next 6 months because the Bureau of Labor Statistics is revising how they're coming up with those data. They put new data into their models and they won't have revised seasonally adjusted numbers till about June of this year. But in the meantime, they will publish unadjusted data, which is not seasonally adjusted. So it's very much spikier.
Yes.
You've got times of the year where the unemployment comes up, January, February.
I thought it went really well.
And then times when it's much lower, October through November typically are when unemployment rates tend to be lower. So we do publish the more variable line, and the most recent number for January for Jackson County was 6.1%. That was the raw or not seasonally adjusted number, and that's up about a half a percentage point over the year. So for the next 6 months, you kind of look at that.
Now, unfortunately, she's at a Rotary meeting right now, so she won't be back for another hour.
Fairly low, and unemployment rates have gone up just a little bit, up about a half a percentage point, both statewide and in the Rogue Valley.
Okay, we'll do.
In terms of the total number of unemployed people, these are people that live here, residents of Jackson County, whether they're working for themselves or in a payroll job, working for a business. And we can see that total employment is actually above pre-pandemic level. So increases in number of people that are self-employed, possibly more agricultural work, but total employment estimates
Monday,
are
Tuesday,
up
Wednesday
a little bit over the pre-pandemic level here in Jackson County. And at the statewide level, we break out the reasons why people are unemployed. So if you're counted in the labor market, you have to be either employed or looking for work. If you're a lot of folks are retired, they wouldn't be counted as unemployed because you're not looking for work in the past month. So that's the Bureau of Labor Statistics definition, is you have to be doing some sort of work activity or working to be counted in the labor force and part of that calculation for the unemployment rate. But what we've seen in Oregon just slightly over the past few months is this little blue line here. These are people that have lost their job through no fault of their own, job losers. The small gold bar there, or gold line, those are people entering the labor market. new entrants that have not found work yet. So either students that have just graduated or migrants into the area. They're in the labor market of Oregon, but they haven't found work yet. And the smaller line down toward the bottom, those are people that have left voluntarily. You've heard a lot about the Great Resignation. People were changing jobs all the time when the labor market was so tight. You know, that might have been part of that, the Great Resignation. It wasn't a huge blip, but we've come back down to more historically normal levels of rates that people quit their jobs voluntarily. So this is looking at the change in payroll employment from the two most recent recessions we've had. The blue line is change in employment from the start of the Great Recession back in 2008, 2009. And see how long it took to bring those jobs back. It was a very long and slow recovery. Whereas the most recent recession during the 2020 pandemic was a very quick drop in employment where everybody was staying home, saving lives, mandated closures in restaurants and things like that. But you can see since then, we've gained a lot of those jobs back, but we're still about 1.4% below where we were in 2020 in terms of our payroll jobs, jobs that are covered by unemployment insurance, where you're typically working for someone else and not self-employed. So we're about 1.4% down where we were, and we haven't made a lot of progress in the past year or so. We bounced back the first couple of years coming out of the pandemic, but things have really slowed down in terms of job growth overall in the Rogue Valley in the past year or so. And we're kind of lagging behind some of the other areas of the state as well. I've got a chart up here in a few minutes. But this looks at what industries have added jobs and what industries are still lagging from where we were. I went back to January of 2020, so just a month before the pandemic really struck, and compared that to the most recent data. Now, if you're back there in the back and you're straining your eyes looking at these charts, I'll put these online. So if you go to qualityinfo.org, that's our website. I'll have these slides up there all with all my other articles and presentations that I've done. You just go to qualityinfo.org and type in my last name, Tauer, T-A-U-E-R. You'll pull up my contact information, click on that, and then I'll have this copy of this presentation up here in the next day or so. But just in general, this is ranked by percentage change from February of 2020, and where we've added the most jobs and the fastest growth has been in healthcare and social assistance, up about 8% since that time 5 years ago. Added about 1,500 jobs over that time. Another area where we've added jobs, grown and bounced back quite a bit, is in construction, about 8% above where we were in 2020, and added about 400 jobs there. Other industries that we've added jobs, business and professional services, up about 300 jobs over that time. And areas where we've lost some jobs, trade, transportation, and utilities. Most of that has been in retail trade, down 250 jobs. A lot of job loss that has not come back has been in leisure and hospitality, still 1,000 jobs below where we were back in February in 2020. You think about some of the things, you know, for example, I think I looked back at the Shakespeare offerings back in 2020 or 2019. I think they were offering around 11 plays. I think the most recent season they had maybe 5 or 6. So that's a lot less people in town. That's a lot less meals served, hotel rooms that need to be cleaned and things like that. So we still have not bounced back entirely in the leisure and hospitality sector. Some areas where we're really far behind in terms of where we were, still about 14% less jobs in manufacturing than we were 5 years ago. So we've most of our major sectors, transportation equipment, food manufacturing, lumber and wood products, have been fairly soft for the past 3 or 4 years in terms of adding jobs. Information, it's a small sector, but that's, you know, radio, TV, telephone services. A lot of things fall into publications, print media, things like that. Been a lot of consolidations in local news. And that's affected local employment as well, down about 23% just in 5 years. So here's how we stand compared to other areas around the state in terms of our percentage change in employment just in the past year, down about 1.5%, 1.4% over the past year in the Rogue Valley, a little bit better than Portland, but slower than the East Cascades area. That's mostly Bend, a lot of employment in the Bend area, Mid-Valley, Salem, Corvallis area. A lot of areas have bounced back a little bit faster in the past year than the Rogue Valley and in the Portland area. This is tough to see back there. It looks a lot better on my computer, but this is just new home sales. So here's where we are, the level of new home sales that we are in 2025. And you can really see, well, you can't really see because the chart's so bad. But if you could really see, we were up here and we're about half that level that we were during the housing boom era of 2005, 2006. It gets better. See, I told you it gets better. Okay, so here is the trend in residential building permits for the Rogue Valley. You can see that back in 2005, 2006, we were permitting over 2,000 homes a year when everybody could just fog a mirror and get a mortgage back in those days. But most recently, we did see a bit of a bump in the last couple of years in terms of housing production. A lot of that is rebuilding from the Alameda fire. A lot of those are residential units been permitted, multifamily and single family homes, ADUs and things like that are creating this a little bit of a spike in the last couple of years because of that rebuilding effort. Most recently, data just came out for 2024. I didn't update the chart, but the number was just around 900, so a little bit lower than the prior year in terms of permits being issued in Jackson County. And you can see in construction employment overall has been bouncing back, but still we're not to the level that we were back in 2005, 2006. We just don't have that frenetic pace of construction activity. And a lot of it has to do with mortgage rates, just not as affordable at 7% as it was at 3.5% to take on financing for home construction. Looking at, this is a couple of slides from Zillow. I know there's local data from the Southern Oregon realtors, but I just pulled some data from Zillow because they have comparable data from a lot of MSAs around the country. And this is our home price index. You can see we're well above where we were back in 2006. Saw that spike in home price values. This is an indexed figure. And what they cover on this Zillow, they look at the home prices for the 2/3 of the homes in the mid tier. So they kind of eliminate the really least expensive homes and the really most expensive homes. And so it's an index that covers that center 2/3 of home sales is kind of how they calculate this. But you can see that home prices have generally flattened over the past year, not a lot of change. And we've seen that across the US as well. And that's a reflection of just higher home costs because of mortgage rates. And they also publish our rental index. You can see our rental costs have steadily risen over the past few years. Just the demand for housing has kept this upward march of rental costs in the Medford area going pretty strong as well. So a little bit on federal government employment. Federal government employment is about 1.5% of the Jackson County's total employment base. But because those jobs are fairly high paying, it's about 2.5% of total wages. So they definitely punches above their weight in terms of the salary impact that those federal government jobs have in the local area. And a couple of spikes there around 2009, 2020, that was just temporary census workers, but counted in federal government employment just there for a year, and then it drops back down the following year. But at least through 2024, we haven't seen, early part of 2025, we haven't seen a big impact in terms of what you're hearing on the news in terms of federal government employees being offered buyouts, agencies being shut down and things like that. We haven't seen those numbers yet, but it's not to say that we won't in the future. For example, if you took a buyout, you might not be eligible for unemployment insurance for many months. You might lose your job. but if you're getting some sort of a severance package, you wouldn't be eligible for unemployment, so you wouldn't have filed a claim. So we're not seeing those numbers jump up quite yet in terms of the unemployment claims for federal employees. But here's how those jobs are distributed around Jackson County. Nursing and residential care facilities with an average wage of about $96,000 a year, over 800 jobs, and that's related to the veterans domiciliary out in White City is where most of that employment is. For private sector companies, we can't divulge what a particular business employs, what their payroll is or what their average wage is, but because federal government employment is not confidential, we can share that information. So what actual entities employ how many people. So you can see that a lot of those jobs here in Jackson County are the VA domiciliary. BLM also has about 140 employees locally, and the Postal Service makes up a lot of the remaining federal government employment here in the Rogue Valley. So that's kind of how our local distribution of federal government jobs is parsed out. And we have statewide data for federal government unemployment insurance claims. And so far, that's the blue line here. The other are federal railroad workers, the much less employment. That's the black line. That's federal railroad unemployment insurance claims. But the blue line there, those are just federal government claiming unemployment insurance. And we haven't seen a big uptick yet, but not to say that won't come. Because a lot of things are being proposed, a lot of things are in the courts, it's going back and forth. So, but it's something that we're keeping an eye on and can track over time if things start to change. Looking at just Jackson County's trend in unemployment insurance claims, this is kind of a really great early indicator or leading indicator in terms of where our economy is going. Are we seeing a lot of layoffs? Are we seeing people come through the doors and filing for unemployment insurance claims? And we really haven't. The little blip there, it almost looks like a heart rate or something. Seasonal layoffs we get every year around late December, early January, Jackson County. So this little spike here, very similar to the spikes we've seen in previous years. So we have not seen, even though bad news tends to sell more papers, you tend to hear about the layoffs in the press. In terms of the trend in the claims numbers, nothing alarming, nothing that's really jumping out in terms of we're seeing the economy take a big nosedive or anything like that. And this is pretty current data. We get weekly claims data, so this is just up through the last couple of weeks. And in terms of the number of businesses, these are businesses with paid employees, and that number has been growing fairly steadily, declined a little bit in 2024 in terms of the total number of businesses. And this is just a chart that kind of looks at where people live and where people work. So we have so much interconnection between our communities and between our counties. I think it's just important to highlight that sometimes. We have about 3/4 of the people in Jackson County that both live and work here in Jackson County. But we send about 4,500 people over to Josephine County in terms of at least where their businesses are located. About 5,200 people that live in Jackson County but work over in Josephine County, or at least their job is counted in Josephine County. Somebody asked me the other day about, well, how does remote work factor into this? And it doesn't factor into this because the government knows where you live and the government knows where your base of your employment is, but where you actually do your job, they don't. So you might work for a company in Grants Pass, you might be working remotely in Jackson County, you would show up as a commuter, but you may not actually leave your house to work for that company in Grants Pass if you're working remotely. So the data is not perfect. So just important to be aware of some of the caveats with some of this information as well. For example, we might have somebody that shows up here that has a business that might be in Eastern Oregon or might be in another state. They're likely telecommuters as well. But here's kind of a little bit of a graph that shows that Medford really is an employment center for the broader county or the broader area. The blue dots represent workers who are employed inside that polygon. So that's the city limits of Medford, and that's where all of the people that commute to Medford, or at least have a job that's based in Medford, where those folks live around the Rogue Valley. In addition to payroll employment, we have a lot of non-employer businesses as well. So about 1 in 12 folks that work either for an incorporated or unincorporated business, self-employed. So this is kind of an industry breakout of where those self-employed businesses are in Jackson County: professional, scientific, technical services, real estate, other services, and healthcare and social assistance have the most non-employer businesses. And that's increased. We only get this data every 5 years from the economic census. But over that 5-year period from 2017 through 2022, the most recent data that we have, we've gained about 1,000 non-employer businesses as well. And here's a breakout of the types of workers that we have in Jackson County from the Census American Community Survey. Those folks, about 13% are either employed in an incorporated or not incorporated business. So it's a substantial portion. We have a lot of entrepreneurs here in the Rogue, and more so than the national average as well. And here's data from the Census Bureau's business formation statistics. So they track the number of new business applications. So these could be businesses that have planned wages or businesses without planned wages. And in Oregon, we don't have a breakout at the county level, but most of the business applications tend to be historically, most recently, from businesses that don't have planned paid wages. So people incorporating in their own business, starting a business, Uber drivers, whatever it is that they're going to start. But we've seen a big jump in those new businesses in the past couple of years. So that's a good sign for a growing economy, is that we're seeing those numbers up. I think it was about 17% over the most recent year. And the data's a little bit lagged. It's from 2022 to 2023, so it's not extremely current. Another bit of information that is available from another government website is the number of patents issued for your local area. You can see a kind of a measure of innovation. Another measure of entrepreneurial activity is looking at the number of patents being issued from your community. We saw a big spike in late 21, had almost 18 patents issued during that 1 month. I'm not sure what business, but somebody was on a creative tear there. Multnomah County has a lot more patents issued because of the software, the information technology sector up there. But that number has really declined. So something's going on in the Portland economy that I think should be really kind of flashing some cautionary yellow lights about, is just seeing that big drop off in the number of patents issued over the most recent couple of years or so. And just kind of another measure of entrepreneurial activity or innovation are the number of folks employed in new businesses. So we have data on which businesses have been in business by 0 to 1 years, 2 to 3 years, in those categories. And for the number of businesses that are 0 to 1 years old, about 3,000 folks work in those newer businesses during the most recent quarter that we had data for. And that number has come down a little bit since 2017. So kind of shows that maybe a little bit less new business startups, maybe a little bit less entrepreneurial activity in the last couple of years than we saw maybe prior to the pandemic. And this is the same data, but just by percentage. This is the percent of employees that work at businesses less than 2 years old in the Rogue Valley. And it's about 3%, down from a high of about 5% before the pandemic. And a little bit on labor demand here. We recently released our 2024 job vacancy survey. So we survey businesses in the Rogue Valley, ask them about how many positions they have open. So that's one measure of kind of labor market demand that we have. Another one is this Help Wanted online index. This comes from an organization called Lightcast. I guess it used to be the Conference Board, but we get it from Lightcast now. But this just shows the number of new online ads posted in Jackson County. It's been pretty stable. We're not seeing a big decline. We did see a big decline during 2020, of course, during COVID, and then it bounced back for a couple of years. But we're really back at that level, that pre-COVID level of new ads being posted online. So just kind of back to a normal, let's see, whatever is normal, more stable level of new ads being issued online each month. And from our job vacancy survey, we have this online. I have a bunch of slides online. I've just got a couple here for today. But looking at the total number of ads declined quite a bit. And this is a very small sample. I don't think actual hiring dropped by 28% over the year. But at least in terms of vacancies from the businesses that responded to our survey, reported 28% less vacancies in 2024 than were published in 2023. Back down to the level that we saw basically during the pandemic, during that period, for the businesses that responded. Statewide, vacancies fell about 20%, declined a little bit steeper in the South Coast and a little bit steeper in the Rift Valley as well. And here are the industries where we saw the most vacancies. Of course, healthcare and social assistance rises to the top with about 1,500. So nearly 40% of the vacancies where we had information for businesses were in the healthcare sector. Manufacturing, even though we haven't seen a lot of job growth in manufacturing, there's still demand. And that's one thing that we try to always tell people is even in slow growing or even declining industries, there's so many positions created due to turnover, due to people moving out of the area, due to promotions. There's always going to be vacancies, even in businesses that may have less employment than they had a year ago. Most of our job vacancies or job openings in the next 10 years are going to be from those replacement openings. So a turnover opening, somebody changes jobs, they move out of the area. So many positions are created due to those turnover jobs. And that's what's kind of reflected a little bit here in these vacancy numbers. Even though manufacturing is a smaller sector, employers told us they had quite a bit of openings, at least in the Rogue Valley in 2024. And here's the actual job titles where we saw the most number of vacancies: personal care aides, fast food counter workers, dental assistants, physical therapy assistants, occupational therapy assistants, a lot of medical jobs. Heavy tractor trailer truck drivers always comes to the top of the list, and other driving occupations as well. And just a couple of slides to finish up on kind of the outlook. This comes from the Federal Reserve's Beige Book. They kind of survey all the 12 different Federal Reserve districts around the US. And just a couple of things that jumped out on me on these latest summaries was contacts in multiple districts said rising uncertainty over immigration and other matters. I'm going to say tariffs. I'll just throw it in there. And other matters is influencing current and future labor demand. So I think that the uncertainty that's been kind of thrown into our economy is creating some of this outlook for the next 6 months that shows a little bit of uncertainty from the business perspective that the Federal Reserve are collecting when they're out contacting all their Federal Reserve folks that provide input into the Beige Book. And here in the Western region, one thing that jumped out on me here was that positions were generally easier to fill except for certain service-related jobs such as housekeeping and building maintenance. So some of those jobs that tend to be higher turnover in good times and bad times, they're still hard to fill just because of the nature of the work, because maybe the pay, things like that. They're still going to be, even as the labor market softens a little bit, it's still difficult to fill some of these positions. And in our job vacancy survey, employers told us about 60% of the jobs that they had open in the Rogue Valley were difficult to fill. We kind of leave that open-ended to employers, but if they say they're difficult to fill, we just believe them. So, and some of those positions are those service positions, higher turnover, lower pay, and things like that. Across Oregon, overall conditions of the community organizations and small businesses weakened. So some of those things showing a little bit softer outlook going forward than maybe the past 6 months. Contact's economic outlook worsened somewhat relative to the prior reporting period. So just some yellow cautionary flags, I think just kind of related to uncertainty that we have across the economy going on right now. And this is the latest outlook from the Office of Economic Analysis. And you can see the couple of recessions that we had in there, but most recently, they're not calling, their baseline forecast is not calling for a recession in Oregon, but just slower job growth. About 15,000, 16,000 jobs expected to be added in the next 12 months in Oregon. And that's about what we saw in the past 12 months. We saw about 18,000 jobs added. They're calling for about 16,000. So just less than 1% job growth is what the Office of Economic Analysis is forecasting going forward. And where they expect those jobs to show up: professional and business services, healthcare and social assistance, leisure and hospitality, retail, trade, and construction, adding the most jobs, and state government, wood products, and local government expected to shed the most jobs in the next 12 months. So that's kind of my 20-minute quick overview of where we see things in the state and in the Rogue Valley. Couple of resources for further information. This rising storm is a great analysis on the coming labor shortage because of the retirements of the baby boomers and slow growing labor force in general, demand for healthcare with less folks in the pipeline coming along because of the trends in the demographics. There's going to be a challenge for businesses going forward in the next few years. And we talked about that a little bit in our report that was released in July. What slower population growth and increasing retirements mean for Oregon and the workforce. And we also publish our careers magazine, and it'll be out in, I think it's in Spanish online as well, and we'll have it, it's available in print, and we send that off to a lot of schools. Most schools we try to get there into the hands of students so they can look at outlooks for careers and be informed about where we see the economy going in the next 10 years or so. Make some of those career planning decisions, how much training they'll need, what jobs pay, things like that. And that's my talk. So I'm happy to answer a couple of questions or as many as you want to throw at me.
I have a question for you. Do you have any sense how artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and basically technology is going to impact the next 5 to 10 years?
It will definitely have an impact. The reach pretty small right now is fairly small. From that business trends and outlook survey, there's data from Oregon on the adoption of artificial intelligence, how many businesses or and what share businesses are using it in their current operations. Right now it's fairly small, but I would expect it to grow over time. At least in terms of state government, we're not really allowed to use any AI-related products right now unless Microsoft approved or on the Microsoft suite. But I'm sure that will take over time too as things loosen up. We're state government's kind of slow adopting new technology. Thank you.
Got a microphone. Thanks for the presentation. I love it. I spent the first 3 years of my career as a labor economist at the Bureau of Labor Statistics in DC. So we ate this stuff up. My question has more to do about surveys, though. So only the census does a head count, door-to-door talent. DLS relies completely on surveys. So as people stop answering landlines, as people stop responding to emails, et cetera, where do you see the future of collecting this data that we all depend on?
Yeah, a lot of it does, it's still telephone. We still do telephone calls. We still contact businesses, part of the current employment statistics survey. We send paper forms out. I think we'll try to make it easier, have some sort of dual factor authentication that employers can respond electronically. So we won't maybe be sending out so many paper forms in the future. I know the census still does a lot of, for example, to come up with a consumer price index. They're still going out and going to stores and seeing what products cost. And who knows how that will go in the future? Will everything just go, oh, we're just going to scan Amazon? We don't need to actually send people out in the field to get pricing data to come up with the consumer price index. So adoption of electronic technology, and people are concerned about their information. You hear all about these data breaches, and that makes people more reticent to provide information because they think, oh, well, if I send this to them, what else are they going to have of mine? And I don't want that to get out there. So the Census Bureau and the Bureau of Labor Statistics has struggled with response rates.
Do you have any information on immigrants and their impact in the community and employment? I didn't see anything in that in your charts.
The Census Bureau tracks that data. We have some data in terms of employment by different ethnic and racial groups. That's from the Census Bureau's local household dynamics data, and shows the number of people that are employed by different racial and ethnic groups locally. We've seen that increase. I didn't provide any of that data today, but if you're curious and want more of that information, please feel free to reach out and I'll be able to share what we do have in terms of employment demographics.
To follow up on that, do you have a good way of tracking, I'll just say, largely Hispanic agricultural workers? I didn't see that in your analysis. So I'll observe that I've had very poor luck hiring what I'll call white workers. And my observation, which isn't statistic, just anecdotal, is that a great part of the agricultural work in this county is done by people who are Hispanic.
So one of the limitations of our data, I'm not sure if I included it on one of the slides, but the payroll employment data, we call it non-farm payroll employment. And one reason is because most agriculture employment is not covered by unemployment insurance. So that's really one area that kind of missed on our radar, just because so many of those jobs are not covered by unemployment insurance. There's data from the agriculture census that's done every 5 years that has a little bit about farm workers, but the most recent is from 2022. So there is county level data, but it's not part of one of our regular surveys just because it falls out of the scope of being covered by unemployment insurance. No, Oregon's population has been really one of the slowest growing states in the past 4 years. According to the Census Bureau, I think Oregon's population has only increased by like 0.8% in the past 4 years. So we're in a really slow growing time. Jackson County, according to the census anyway, has actually lost population in the past 4 years. I imagine a lot of that is people that have left the area after the Alameda fire as well. There are data from the American Community Survey on people where they change residences over that time, but it's sample based. So the margins of error on some of that data, when you start slicing it down to the local level, it becomes really not very specific because of the larger margins of error. But the IRS knows where you filed taxes last year and where you filed taxes this year. So there are migration data from the IRS. I've written about that, but doesn't really have any demographic data in terms of ethnic, racial, age, sex, anything, just where you lived then, where you live now. But it's kind of a way to not have so much survey data that it's actual hard numbers. At least it's from tax returns.
It surprised me anecdotally to see the number of hotels coming in, chains like the old spaghetti factory coming into our area. Somebody thinks we're growing. And I don't know what statistics they're looking at. That's one observation. I found that pretty hopeful. And then our airport expanding so dramatically. That seems like a really hopeful anecdote. And the other observation, which doesn't go anywhere, it's just an observation, is that I'm in one of the fields that is having a hard time hiring, physical therapy. And it seems like the higher barrier jobs are the ones we're having trouble filling. And that's, I don't know if that's made worse possibly by AI coming in, but I think we're in a turmoil of younger people not finding whether it's the motivation or the funds to join high barrier, high skill level jobs, at least in our area.
And the cost of education has to have something to do with that. I mean, if you look at high cost of housing, high interest rates relatively to where they were maybe 2 years ago, maybe not historically high, but high housing costs, high cost of education, a lot of barriers to folks to be able to pursue levels of higher education. I know I wanted to go to medical school, but I had no backing, and I knew that I just was not going to be able to afford eight years of college. I made it through 5, so I figured that was doing pretty good. But it is a challenge. And part of the things that we hear anecdotally as well are challenges for the trailing spouse. So there may be a job there for one of the couple, but then there's nothing, if they're in a very specialized field, there may be not a job locally, prospects aren't as great. If the person is in a different specialized field, there aren't the similar opportunities maybe that there are in healthcare.
I can add a little bit of color onto this for you. Many of you know I'm a grad student at Purdue, and I just wrote a paper on this. So the U.S. Chamber of Commerce just came out with data on last Friday, and it kind of gives a little bit of color to what we're talking about. One, it reported that we have 8 million open jobs in the United States, and we only have 6.8 million that are considered unemployed and available to work. So there's obviously a deficiency there. So there really is a war for the talent. AI is having an impact on that. 2022 projections said that by the year 2030, 30% of the workforce globally will need to either be reskilled or upskilled. Oregon will have a lag on that. We're not a leader in that. But AI is definitely an inflection point in the workforce for those of us that are trying to hire for these positions. Something else I jotted down. Part of the reason we're seeing a decline in the hiring pool, the talent pool, coming out of the pandemic, we saw Gen Zs having less children, so the population is actually shrinking. We saw women leave the workforce in record numbers because of childcare issues, and they have stayed home to be homemakers. We also saw 17% retire after the pandemic, and then we have early retirees for my generation, Gen X. We're seeing the greatest transfer of wealth happening in the United States. And so there's a lot less Gen Xers are saying it's not essential that I have to return to work or be in the workforce. So it's definitely having an impact on businesses here and across the country.
Great points. Yes, the childcare issue is something that comes up. I sit on a couple of different regional solutions teams, and the issue of childcare and accessible, affordable, that's being able to have both, if there are 2 people in a household, to have both people with children working, it's almost unaffordable if you've got to pay for 2 childcare slots.
There was one other stat that I want to share that was a little troubling to me based on the work that I do. 36% of 25 to 34-year-olds, that's that prime workforce coming out of college, chose that they were going to stay home and not work in the workforce and work on personal development. So that's making a huge dent in our labor force as well.
Well, thank you very much for having me and all your great questions.
Guy, our club supports the Smart Reading program. So as a thank you for being our speaker, we will donate a children's book in your name. Today's book is Red Riding Hood and the Sweet Little Wolf. If you can sign this later, we will donate that to the Smart Reader program. Thanks to everybody on Zoom. Wonderful program today, very interesting.